All right, so we're going to move on to some more practice here. Again, as the instructions indicate, this sheet here is kind of a review, but at the same time, it's got some that we're going to have to use what we have been reviewing for the past couple of days on radical review, and you'll kind of see why this is needed when you get into this form. Obviously, as always, make sure you pay attention to your directions. So you see the first one just says find the missing side of each angle and round your answers to the nearest tenth if necessary. So again, you really need to make sure that you pay attention to what you're being asked for. For example, number one, what am I being asked for? Am I being asked for a leg or a hypotenuse? Well, remember the hypotenuse is always across from the 90-degree angle. So this would be my hypotenuse, this side here, which means this has to be a leg. Okay. So whether it's A or B, it doesn't matter which way you rename those. But again, the key here is the formula A squared plus B squared equals C squared, and then putting your numbers into the proper place. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out because then you look down here at number 3, and here I'm actually looking for the hypotenuse, right? Because it is across from the right angle. So in this case here, I'm looking for C. In this case here, I'm looking for either A or B. Okay, so it's really important that you pay attention to what you're being asked to do. Obviously, the same thing holds true for number 5 through 8. It says find the missing side of each triangle. C is the hypotenuse, and A and B are legs. You'll note again for number 5, you're given A and B, but you're not given C, so that's what you're looking for. Whereas on number 7, you're given B and C, and then so that means you're looking for side A or leg A. So again, just make sure you pay attention to what's actually being asked. All of this is pretty much review from what you've already seen. Okay, this is when this kind of takes a turn a little bit, and maybe it's something that we've not seen before or not really encountered before, and just not really familiar with radicals in general. Again, this is something you're going to encounter quite a bit in higher level math, algebra 2, even college algebra. You're going to see this a lot, and so it's pretty important that we gain an understanding of how this works. And actually, it works exactly the same. It's just now we've got a new piece of the puzzle that we have to look at. So let's look at this one here. First of all, let's decide, are we looking for a hypotenuse or are we looking for a leg here? So if you notice this X that you're looking for, it's the missing side, it is across from the right angle, which means that we are in fact looking for the hypotenuse. So let's go ahead, like we've been doing before, let's go ahead and write our formula. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Vitally important to go ahead and put that in there. And now let's go ahead and fill in what we know. So we do not know what C is, so we're going to leave that as C squared for now. But we can go ahead and input these two values here. Now, again, we don't really know. It doesn't really matter which one's A or B. So we can just write this out either way as far as this goes. But what I want you to understand is I'm going to take this square root of 14 and I'm going to put it in for A. Okay? So that means this entire quantity inside of here is being squared. As a matter of fact, I'm going to use parentheses just to help me to remember that is the whole thing is being squared. So the square root of 14 is being squared. Now I'm going to add to that side B, so we'll call this side B. And again, I'm making sure to understand that this whole thing is being squared, okay? So really I have 2, the square root of 2 being squared, okay? And that is still equal to C squared. Now that may look like a lot of gibberish right now, but I promise you this is going to make more sense as we kind of go through this. So let's deal with this part first and what we're talking about. So we're saying I'm going to take the square root of 14 and I'm going to square it. Well, what's going to happen when I do that? Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and just do this down here just so you can kind of see what happens. I'm going to have the square root of 14 squared, which means the same thing as if I were to take 2 squared. That means I'm going to say 2 times 2, right? So if I have the square root of 14 squared, really, in essence, what I have is the square root of 14 times the square root of 14, okay? And that is going to give me what? What if I do 14 times 14? I believe that is 196, but let me check that real quick. 14 times 14 is 196, so I get the square root of 196. What really happens here? If I take the square root of that 196 and I put that in my calculator, I'm going to end up with just plain old 14. So what I want you to understand is anytime you square a square root, it actually eliminates that. Okay, it gets rid of it. So really all we have left from this right here, from the square root of 14 squared, is all of this kind of goes away, and the only thing we're left with is just plain old 14, which makes it pretty easy. Now here's where it gets a little more tricky, okay? So again, we said that we are squaring this entire quantity. So here's what we need to realize is happening. I'm going to square the 2, but I'm also going to square the square root of 2. So here's basically what's happening. Again, I'll kind of write this down here. I'm trying to save enough room because we've got another problem we need to work through. But I'm going to take 2 squared. And remember, there's always multiplication in between here. And I'm going to multiply that times the square root of 2 squared. So let's just think about what happens here. So what I'm going to end up with is 2 squared equals 4. And I'm going to multiply that times this. Now remember what happens. What happens when you square a square root? Well, when you square a square root, it just simply goes away. And the only thing left is, in fact, the 2. So really I have 4 times 2. And 4 times 2 is 8. So all of this mess right here that looked like it was going to be an enormous problem is actually just 8. Okay? So I have 14 plus 8 equals c squared. So what I'm left with is 22 equals c squared, but I'm not quite done, right? Because now I have to undo this square in order to get c by itself, because that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this quantity right here. So I've got to take the square root of c squared, which again undoes that, but I also have to do it to this side over here. Now here's the last question we have, because here's my instructions. It says leave your answers in simplest radical form. We have to ask ourselves, is this in fact simplest radical form? Is there a perfect square that we could pull out of that? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull out our handy dandy list that we had made the other day, and I'm just going to look through and kind of see. So I don't need to start at 25 because that's bigger than 22. 16. Will 16 go into 22 evenly? No, it won't. Will 9 go into 22 evenly? Well, no, it won't either. Will 4 go into 22 evenly? No, it won't. So guess what? This answer is already in simplest radical form. So my answer for this problem is right here, x equals the square root of 22. And I just leave my answer like that. Now that seems pretty easy, right? Not very difficult at all. So now let's look at number 11. And initially, by looking at number 11, we're like, wow, this is going to be easy. Now, we looked at this one, we thought, oh, no, this is going to be extremely difficult, and I'm never going to be able to get it done. Well, let's look at what happens with number 11. So with number 11, let's think about what we're looking for. Are we looking for a leg, or are we looking for a hypotenuse? Well, you notice here, my x is right here. My hypotenuse is clearly defined. It's right here. It's the longest side. It's also across from my right angle. So that must mean that this is a leg. Okay, so I'm going to start with my formula again. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in what I know. So I know that 14 is my hypotenuse. Probably a good idea to go ahead and put that into your equation first. That way you don't get it confused, because again, these two doesn't really matter because of the commutative property, but it does matter that we get the c in the right spot. So let's go ahead and put 14 squared right over here. And then I'm going to take this 7, and we'll make that the a in this case. So 7 squared plus b squared. So we're going to say we're looking for b squared. We're going to try to figure out what this x is right here. So now let's think about what we have to do. Let's do some math. So 7 squared is 49 plus b squared. Okay, we're just going to bring that down as it is because we can't do anything with it. Equals 14 squared. Well, we already did that just a few minutes ago right here, right? 196. And so now I've got to try to get b squared by itself. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and subtract 49 from both sides. And if I subtract 49 from both sides, this is going to cancel out, and I'm going to end up with b squared equals 147. Okay, 196 minus 49 is 147. So again, the same step that I did up here, in order to undo c squared, I had to take the square root. So down here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the square root of this b squared, which is going to leave me with just b. But again, if I do it to this side, I have to do it to this side over here. So this is going to be b equals the square root of 147. And we may be really tempted to say, you know what, I don't think there's a perfect square that's in 147. So I'm just going to do exactly what I did for number 9, and I'm just going to write down x equals square root of 147. Well, you can do that, but again, your instructions tells you to leave your answer in simplest radical form. So let's at least look at our perfect squares list, okay? And again, just looking at it initially, we think, oh, no, I'm never going to find anything that's going to go into 147. Well, believe it or not, again, we would always start at the number closest to it. 144 is not going to go into 147. And we can pretty well see that these bigger numbers, they're not going to go into 147 evenly because it's just too big of a number, right? So let's go back here to maybe 64. If you take 147 divided by 64 and see if that will go into it, I don't think it goes into it evenly. But if you move up here to this number right here, again, it maybe it doesn't look like it initially, but if you check with your calculator, you'll discover that 49 goes evenly into 147. As a matter of fact, it goes into 147 3 times, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to rewrite this. This goes back to the things you were learning over the last couple of days. You probably were not really excited about it. We're going to rewrite this as the square root of 49 times 3. Okay, so 49 times 3 is exactly the same thing as square root of 147. We could take it one step further and we could go ahead and split it out one more time and say the square root of 49 times the square root of 3. Okay, and then last step, we would say, what is the square root of 49? Well, the square root of 49, according to our list here, the square root of 49 is 7. All right? So the 7 just comes out from under the radical, but there is no perfect square that will go into the square root of 3. So it has to stay. So guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This is actually our final answer. So x really equals 7 radical 3. That would be your final answer. And you could go ahead and put your units, kilometers. But that is how those problems need to be done. Okay, you need to make sure that you go to the simplest radical form. And so these are the ones that are really going to give you the most work. Okay, the other ones you're probably going to be able to do pretty quickly based on what you've been able to do so far already. So you can see on the back of this page, you have equally as many as you had on the front. So again, these first 8 or so, you're probably not going to have any issues with. Again, just make sure you pay attention to the directions. These are the ones that are going to challenge you a little bit, but it's okay to be challenged. Listen, we're going to a higher level. We're rising above, and so we're trying to get ourselves ready for not just junior year, senior year of high school, but even beyond into college as well. So if you need any help, just make sure to contact either me or Miss Wheeler, and we would be more than happy to try to help you with whatever you may be having issues with. Thanks, guys.